Good evening, friends. This is ARRM Arun. I'm the president of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SICCI. On behalf of SICCI, we take great pleasure in welcoming our esteemed guest for today, Mr. N. Shankar, Chairman of the Sanmar Group. We also take great pleasure in welcoming each one of you to today's program. We are glad to have you with us today. As some of you might be aware, SICCI has completed 111 years of service to industry, government, and society. During these years, SICCI has conducted several programs of interest to each one of our stakeholders. And during each one of these programs, we have had several eminent guests joining us and addressing us. Invariably, during these addresses, our guests restrict their address to only about 20 to 25 minutes of their time and speak primarily in areas of their expertise. We, however, felt that our guests have much more to offer than just their area of expertise. We felt that we can gain from our guests' life's journey, what has caused them to be successful, and also hear their inputs for the next generation and society. It is with that in mind that we came up with the concept of SICCI 360. Since starting in October of 2020, SICCI 360 has now crossed 15 sessions, with today being our 16th session. We're extremely glad to be continuing on this journey. Before I share with you points on this slide that you see in front of you, I would like to draw your attention to the names of two of our executives listed on the bottom of this slide. Please make note of their numbers, and if any of you have any difficulty connecting during the course of this call, please feel free to give our executives a call and they'll be glad to assist you reconnect. As I was saying, SICCI 360 is a recent foray for us, and we've been building on the experience that we've gained from our seminars. We wanted to give it a name that depicts a multidimensional perspective, and that's how we came up with the SICCI 360 brand. We orient this to be a lively discussion with our eminent guests. Each one of our guests have spanned various fields, and we would like our guests to share with us their path to excellence, what has caused them to be successful, as well as their inputs for society and the next generation. We have a stringent criteria for selecting our guests. We typically look for guests having more than 4 decades of contribution to their respective industry as well as society. This, of course, is an apolitical platform. The format that we follow for the SICCI 360 session is that there are 5 distinct sections that we talk about with our guest. Number 1 is our guest's expertise. Number 2 is our guest's organization and their role within their organization. Number 3 is our guest's career path. Number 4 is our guest's inputs for the next generation. And finally, our guest inputs for society. We would certainly like you, the audience, to participate along with us. Please feel free to share your comments, your thoughts on the chat box, and our SICCI 360 team will be glad to moderate it. And if at all there's any question, they'll be glad to feed it to us so that it can be answered during the course of this call. There are 2 guidelines that we follow during this program. Number 1 is we would like our guests to be at comfort at all points of time, such that our guest feels enthused to come back at a later date when we would like to invite them. And secondly, we would like you, the audience, to be able to gain by your participation in this program. So these are the very simple guidelines that we follow. With those few words on SICCI 360, I would now like to take a little bit of time to share with you about our esteemed guest for today, Mr. N. Shankar, Chairman of the Sanmar Group. Mr. Shankar completed his bachelor's in chemical engineering from the Alagappa College of Technology, University of Madras. This was in 1965, where he secured first-class distinction. Mr. Shankar then completed his master's in chemical engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. This was in 1967. Since then, he has been contributing to the growth of the Sanmar Group. The Sanmar Group, as most of you would be aware, is a Chennai-based group that spans chemicals, engineering, and shipping. The Sanmar Group has 11 companies, along with 5 other joint ventures. They have over 8,000 employees, with a presence in the US, Mexico, Egypt, and several locations across India. Mr. Shankar is on the boards of several companies, including NOCIL, FL Smith, the Indian Advisory Board of CRH Place PLC, Ireland. Mr. Shankar has also served as President and Chairman in public bodies representing trade and industry. This has included ASSOCHAM, the Indo-US Joint Business Council, MCCI, and MMA. Mr. Shankar was elected Fellow of the Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers and honorary member of the Chemical Industries Association. Mr. Shankar is also on the board of several charitable organizations, including perhaps education as well, including IIM Kozhikode, the Cancer Institute in Chennai, Chennai Wellington Corporate Foundation, and importantly, the Child's Trust Hospital in Chennai as well. Mr. Shankar is Vice President of the All India Tennis Association. He's President of the Tamil Nadu Cricket and Tennis Associations. He has received several awards, including the Lala Shriram National Award for Leadership in Chemical Industry from the Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers, as well as the Rasa Udayog Ratna from the Chemical Industries Association. Mr. Shankar has been granted the Lifetime Achievement Award at TICON Chennai 2010. Since 1989, Mr. Shankar has been the Honorary Consul General for Denmark in South India, and during this period, he was awarded the Knight of the Order of the Dannenbrog, first class by the Danish government in recognition of his services. This post is now led by his son and my good friend, Mr. Vijay Shankar. With those few words, I would again like to welcome Mr. N. Shankar to this evening's program. Mr. Shankar, vanakkam. Glad to have you with us.
Good, thank you. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Getting started, Mr. Shankar, on your areas of expertise, we'd first like to start off from 1991 to 92. During this was the time of India's liberalization, and during that time, you have interacted significantly with the finance minister of the time, Mr. Manmohan Singh. Can you share with us on your experiences as to how it was at ground zero during such a momentous occasion? And also, now that we are perhaps 30 years down the road, have we achieved the required economic reforms to the fullest extent?
Yeah, as far as 91, 92 is concerned, I have to say it was an amazing experience. It was just pure luck that I happened to be there as president at that time. Actually, there was another person from Chennai, the late Dr. Dutt, he was president of SICCI. So the two of us had we shared our experiences. It was a really wonderful time, primarily in the sense that it personified what industry government interaction could be. We were able to talk very, very freely to any government official, including not just the finance minister, but the prime minister. I mean, you could have impromptu sessions with them. They would listen to you. And things that happened in those 2 months or 3 months, if somebody had told you they would happen, we would have said it's unlikely. I mean, it was rumoured. I had been in industry for about 15, 20 years before that. And that was an area where we were totally encompassed by industrial licensing, import licensing, what have you. And within 3 months, all of it went away. I mean, none of us would have believed it we had told us ahead of time. And what was the receptiveness of the government, people in the government? If I have been, I give you a simple example. There was an act called the MRTP Act. And at that time, it said that the rules said that if your total assets of yours and your associate companies are more than 20 crores, then you needed all sorts of approvals which you almost never got. So they were trying to, the industry suggested it be relaxed. And Rangarajan Kumaramangalam was the Minister of State for Company Affairs. And then one meeting he asked me, and of course, those days the other thing was ministers spoke to you in first names. I could call him in first name. He said, Shankar, what do you think? Should it be 20 crores or 30 crores or 50 crores? And honestly, I told him, Ranga, I think it's ridiculous to talk about 50. You said 1,000 crores. I'll be back here next year asking for relaxation. It doesn't make sense to put a restriction based on size of industry. Put it based on competition, on monopoly, not on size of industry. He was taken aback. He said, what are you suggesting? I said, there should be no limit. And he just couldn't believe this because all of his notes had said should it be 1,000 or 500 or 200. So he called his secretary of company law general called Mr. Mohanty and said, this is a crazy thing that Shankar is suggesting. But the fact is, within 2 days, that became the law. They relaxed the monetary limit. There were many other examples to give you like this where they were willing to listen and take action. Another one was the FIPB, which was actually a parallel approval body. And then I happened to speak to actually Mr. Narasimha Rao, the Prime Minister. And I dared to oppose him. And he said, I've opened up licensing. FIPB will clear it in one shot. I said, sir, I beg to differ. It has become an additional clearance. Will you clear this? Then it goes back to SIA. And he got a little upset. He said, no, I don't think you know what you're talking about. Sir, with due respect, I will stick to my guns. He checked and realized I was right. And the next day, he passed an order saying that if the FIPB approves it, it's approved. Things happened in those 2 days. So I think that was a very unique and amazing experience, and I was lucky to be there. Your second question was, did the reforms deliver? I think they delivered dramatically in those 2, 3 months. But then you have to realize one thing about reforms. They are not a one-shot, stuck in time sort of situation. You have to keep on reforming, if I can use the word. Even if you do 100% of what you need to at a particular point in time, within a very short period of time, you have to start reforming again because the environment around you has changed. The world environment, the local environment, whatever else has changed. That I think has not kept pace. There are many areas where uh, there has been a slowdown or even a bit of a pullback, and which is why constantly chambers of commerce like you and others are having to raise this issue. I only wish the a little bit of the atmosphere that had existed at that time continued.
When we look at the situation today, perhaps to a certain extent, we can say post-COVID, because of the fact that things are improving from the time that we started off in the early 2020, the early part of 2020. But coming down from a period where we already had several quarters of a downswing and then coming into the COVID period, if we look at the performance of our companies and our economy at large, we find that a good number of the larger companies are certainly declaring very good results. But when you look at our MSMEs, they are continuing to struggle with the little or no attention given to them. While a lot has been spoken, what has been translated to the ground has not been that significant. Do you feel that there is a will lacking in order to transition our MSMEs to the next level?
Let me take that in two parts. First part you said was performance of industry. See, it's become very sectoral. There are some sectors which have had their best years ever post COVID, which is because the rest of the world has suffered and we have had the advantages to succeed. So the post-COVID situation in terms of success or not succeeding has depended upon, has been very sectoral. But coming to the question of MSMEs and large industry, see, the issue is India has not come down clearly on the path of either a completely free economy or a completely controlled economy. And the MSMEs are caught in between. Large industries are able to fend for themselves. They can make their own path, they can do things the way they want. But MSMEs are very dependent on the enabling environment. And if you look at MSMEs on one side, government tells them, look, your businesses, you have to succeed by yourself. Uh, you're a business. You're there to take a chance and succeed. But on the other hand, they constantly modify credit policy and industrial policy to help them. So it's becomes a tug of war between different interests, and the MSMEs have to learn to adapt. It's very difficult for MSMEs. You don't have the sort of resources to throw on that large industry has to adapt to these changes.
So, அவங்களுக்கு என்ன solution, Mr. Shankar?
Solution, unfortunately, in our country, it all lands up in the hands of politics. I'll give you a very simplistic solution. We end up, we have, as you know, I'm not trying to make this a political thing, but we have two large political parties. On the economic side, they are 90% aligned. But unfortunately, because of politics, when they are in power and when they are out of power, the situation changes completely. The same policy that they support when they are in power, they go out of power and shoot against it. And it's happening every few years whenever there's a change of government. I think this is something where there should be better sense evolving. They should sit down and evolve a common economic program on which there will be no disagreement. There are so many other things on which you can disagree on the way of implementation, the way of management, the way of government. You can do all that. But on these basic economic principles, where really they are aligned, they should, I think, get together. Once they do that, I think a lot of this will be behind us.
Absolutely. Today, MSMEs are the prime stay of any developing economy, let alone it being a growing economy as well. So if we don't give them the required attention, we are not going to get the required benefits. But having said that, Mr. Shankar, India has definitely seen several industrial revolutions, whether it be in agriculture, whether it be in manufacturing, or even services. And perhaps over the last decade and continuing forth, technology is going to be playing a very important role. Which industry do you feel has a very good future in India?
This I have a very strong view. I think in almost every industry has a good future in India. I mean, okay, that's being exaggerated. Almost every industry has a good future in India because take one simple parameter. Look at the per capita consumption of any product. In India is way down below. I mean, it's lower than countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and even my own product. We see we are way down below all that. And if you superimpose that on a population like India has 1.3 to 1.4 billion, the potential market that exists in India doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. In fact, in my business, PVC, the international majors are setting up capacities all over the world to feed to the Indian market. Today, India imports more than 60% of its consumption of PVC. So I would say it's not a question of market. It's a question of enabling it by organizing the right infrastructure, the right power, the right financial resources, each of which needs study and application. And I would say the best people to tell you what is required are the people in the business. Unfortunately, today there's a tendency to look at them as the wrong people. They're the other side. How can you ask them for what's required because they would be very biased, which is not true. I think they would get the right answers if they talk to them.
We have our first audience question for today. It's from Mr. V.N. Shivashankar, who's Vice President of SICCI. Mr. V.N.S., can I request you to please go ahead?
Good evening, sir. It's a pleasure having an opportunity to interact with you. Sanmar Group has been one of the forerunners in having joint ventures. It's been proved to be very successful. Any thoughts you can share on how you have ensured the longevity and success of the joint venture, especially with the transitioning generations?
That's a very good question. I think I lucked out it was the right time at the right place. My first joint venture is now 46 years old, still doing very well. And I negotiated it myself when I was 31 years old. So, I didn't have any track record of mistakes to follow me through, and I had never had any coaching in what's the right way to set up a joint venture. And I went ahead and did it with my heart, put it that way. I said, I will do the right things, I will be honest to my partners, and I will live up to the spirit of the agreement. I've done that for the last 45 years, and it's stood me in good stead. I make statements like, we negotiate the first joint venture agreement for months on end with all sorts of commas and codicils and all that. But I tell them, once you sign this, you'll never see it for the next, we'll never refer to it. Because once you have to refer to an agreement, it means the agreement is an end. The joint venture is between the people. It's not something in writing in words. And that I think we have been able to prove. Another funny example, the first time I negotiated agreement when I was 30 years old, one of the guys on the other side, a fairly venerable old corporate executive, asked me, Mr. Shankar, please don't misunderstand, but you're an individual and we are a corporation. And individuals have a fixed lifetime. So we have to prepare for the changes on your side. So don't you think this is a bit of an uneven agreement between an individual and a corporation? Well, I did answer something at that time, but the best answer I have is, 46 years down the road, I am still sitting on this side of the table, and they have changed about 7 times through mergers and acquisitions and change of people and all that. So I think the main thing is you have to adhere to the spirit of the agreement and maintain excellent relationships, personal relationships. The letter of the agreement is secondary. And the other thing, one funny comment I'd make is you must have a very clear path in the JV agreement to end the agreement, to end the JV. If it goes to a stage where, for whatever reason, you're not able to do it, there is a very clear path to ending it. And it's funny enough, if you have that path, then there's very often no need to refer to it.
Ethics in business, that's, in fact, you can even say ethics in society. That's certainly a supreme, because one can easily say that that's the basis of what life or relationship is built upon. You've insisted in ethics in business for a very long period of time. Do you see adequate standards being followed by other businesses? And if not, what do you think is further necessary to be able to grow on this?
Let me not comment on other people's ethics they follow because uh, it would not be appropriate for me to do. What I have done is I have found that when I started that uh, insisting on setting good ethical standards has stood us in very good stead, both in dealing internally and externally. And the simple adage that I adapted was that if I personally adopt good ethics in dealing with the internal external environment, then my employees will follow the same. And it has a double benefit. One, in terms of your employees, they trust you because they feel that they will not be dealt with unethically. And more important, quite often they come and tell me that they're able to sleep at nights, which is a very big plus point for us. And externally, we deal very, very ethically, and we insist that people who deal with us, our constituents like suppliers, buyers, they also adopt the highest ethical standards. And it's worked for us all these years.
We now move on to the second section, which is points on your organization as well as your role within your organization. Mr. Shankar, you identify the potential of the PVC industry and certainly helped its growth in India. How did you envisage the commercial aspect of this sector at that period of time, which was several decades ago?
As far as the beginnings of the PVC industry, I can't claim credit because it was an industry that was envisioned and started by my father and his partner, Mr. T.S. Narayan. My father, Mr. K.S. Narayan, and his partner, Mr. T.S. Narayan Swamy of India Cements. They envisioned and set up this business. And when I got involved in it, it was a 6,000 ton venture. And by the time I took it over in terms of ownership, it was about 10 years ahead, but it was still 6,000 tons. Since then, it has today grown to close to 1,000,000 tons. So I could take credit for going beyond that, but not for the start of the business. But I must say one thing, I don't think anybody envisaged this sort of explosive growth. Uh, when we today, out of 3.5 million tons of PVC that is consumed in the country, 3 million tons goes into the manufacture of PVC pipe. And that was, I think, the sort of growth that nobody anticipated. In fact, in the very first year when we produced PVC pipe in 67 or 68, we produced 12 tons in the year, and we were overjoyed that we hit double figures. Today we talk of 3 million tons. I mean, it's an unbelievably growth factor. And the demand for this PVC could be even higher if availability was there. Today, as I told you, out of the 3.5 million tons that's consumed, I would say 1.5 million tons is imported. So we need to ensure more PVC is produced in this country.
When pollution control norms were at its embryonic stage, the Sanmar Group implemented the ZLD, which is a zero liquid discharge, at its manufacturing facilities. This was among a slew of steps taken to ensure sustainable growth. How was the Sanmar Group able to conceive it? How were you able to implement it and sustain it over so many years as well?
See, as far as I think we have time, so I'll take a minute and give you a story. See, I've always believed, I'm a chemical engineer, and I've always believed in being the forefront of treating our effluents. The chemical industry, by its very nature, tends to pollute the atmosphere if you don't treat it properly, if you don't handle the outputs properly, the effluents properly. So from the beginning, I've been very particular about treating our outputs carefully so they don't hurt the environment. One example, we set up a distillery in the 70s. I set up a distillery. And distillery is one of the most noxious polluting industries you can think of. At that time, the way of pollution was to dig a hole and pump your effluent into it. Just leave it there. I decided that wasn't the I tried checking. No, sorry. In fact, that wasn't the right thing. They just let it out into the road or whatever it was. And I thought it was wrong. So I went all over, I sent people all over the country to UP and other places where there are a lot of distilleries. And they said, no, we don't let it out of the road. We dig big holes and put it into that holding tanks. And the effluent distills itself and gradually becomes less noxious. So 40% of my project cost was spent on digging holes and putting the effluent into it. Now today, if I did that, I'll be arrested. But what I want to tell you was at that time, that was the state of the art. You cannot do more than what is state of the art. So I've always believed to keep up to date with state of the art in pollution control. But it's never been enough. No matter what we did, it is not enough to do something better. So sometime around in early 2000, I would say, I got really fed up because no matter what we did, we couldn't satisfy the local political interest, government, whatever. We were always in trouble. We set up some of the latest at that time, effluent disposal techniques, but it wasn't enough. There was constant complaints. In fact, one example was once there was a whiff of chlorine in our cell plant. Now, that is not due to us, it's due to the power failing, and we had an agreement for 24-hour non-failing power. But anyway, it failed for a few seconds. There was a whiff of chlorine, and people within the cell room, your own employees, got a whiff. But it was nothing. I mean, we gave them some oxygen, gave them some water, and within 10 minutes, they're back on the job. But the next morning, we were told that a woman 12 miles away had miscarried because of this. And there was a huge crowd outside our factory. So that is when that was the last straw for me. And I said, no matter what I do, I'm not going to satisfy this. We can only be found fault with our effluents if there are effluents. So I went down to our plant at Maytur and told my people, I laid it on a deadline. I said, in the next 9 months, we will stop discharging anything from our plant. If you don't, I'll shut down the plant. Now, of course, that's a very unrealistic comment, and my people went up in arms. This is realistic. This is not technical. This is I said, work at it. Common sense. And funny enough, obviously, I made one change. I originally said zero discharge, but then we changed to zero liquid discharge because vapor discharge is impossible to stop. Water becomes steam that goes out, and it's not really hurting. So we made it zero liquid discharge, and we achieved it within 9 months. With a lot of course, there was a lot of technology, but a lot of it was common sense. Finally, we had a liquid effluent, a lot of water was going. Ultimately, a lot of the effluent goes out as water. Once you treat it, the water that's coming out, we could easily get it out into the common sewer. But I said, even that we will not do. Just, we had a lot of acreage. Just put raw grass and treat this to grow lawns. Small things like that. And we made ourselves a zero liquid discharge plant. And we had a big ceremony where the pipe we had to pump out our effluents, we cemented it in a public function and closed it down so there's no way of liquid coming out of our plant. And I must say that the last few years, these things have come down. And people still try to make complaints, but I come and say, if we show us where it goes out, there is no way for it to go out. And we have achieved zero liquid discharge in all our plants. And we're very proud of that. In fact, I and my team coined that terminology, zero liquid discharge. And now it's part of the lexicon. I think it's part of the Central Pollution Board rules saying you have to ensure zero liquid discharge.
We are also sharing a few photographs of yours, Mr. Shankar. So you please feel free to add a few words to them as we go along. Our next question is about skills going into the employee side of things. You are a person who is known for your ability to be able to identify the right person for the right job. How do you do this? How has this worked for you? Is this an acquired skill? And is it possible to be able to get this by training?
That's what I was going to say. I don't think I can explain how I do it. I have been lucky in getting the right person, the right job. Our attrition rate is very low. We have people staying with us for 40, 50 years at the highest levels. We've been lucky on this. I don't think it's something you can impart by training by itself. At that level of employment, this picture which you asked me to comment, the gentleman in the middle is the chairman of Emerson Electric, one of our partners. The other person is M.N. Radha, who just retired last year after about 42 years or 40 years with us. He was a person in charge of developing our engineering group. Anyway, so I think we can't depend on training. Everybody who comes up to that level is well trained by himself. We don't have to do the training, whether he comes from another industry or has done it by himself. He is well trained. The other thing is that what we have to look for the right qualities in the person. And what I look for is not so much knowledge or technical ability per se, but for common sense. I'm one of those who believes that management is substantially based on common sense and how you apply it. And we have to see how this individual has applied his common sense to different situations. how he interacts with other individuals, what his personal skills are, what his ethical standards are. And these I look at as important factors and I try to keep them. And we've been lucky in that. We've got some excellent people. And the growth of the group depends on them, not on me. Because obviously, an individual like they cannot run all these different businesses. And it's these people who have helped us grow.
Curious, Mr. Shankar, based on what you're saying, do you give them certain situations and do a role playing? Is that how you identify how they respond to these situations or how they respond to ethical decisions to be taken?
See, maybe I'm a dinosaur, but I don't believe in this role play and all this stuff because I'm a little bit of practice. I believe the best evaluation of an individual is on the job. Obviously, we go through a series of interviews and then some of us sit down and decide who's the right person, shall we take him on. But we make it very clear that within a year, he will either be there for us permanently or he'll be out. If he doesn't fit our requirements. For example, recently we hired a very, very well qualified, excellent person to head our plant in Egypt. Very senior person, has worked in very senior business groups, well qualified, run business much larger than ours. But within a few months, the culture fit didn't take. And to us, culture fit is crucial, it's critical. Culture, not just in terms of, it's culture is a very wide ranging word. It covers ethics, it covers the way you do business. And more important, fitting in with the culture that we have established. After 50 years, it's difficult for us to change our culture. The individual has to learn to fit into our cultural milieu and work in that. And within, I would say, 4 months, he's a very, very senior person. He's probably the senior most person we've ever appointed. And we decided to part ways. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's a failure of his or of ours. It's just a mismatch. We're very particular about that match of cultures.
You believe in empowering employees to function, whether competently or ethically, and absolutely without any fear. How do you enable this and how do you sustain this principle? And also in that context, the Sanmar Group encourages ex-employees to rejoin. Is it because of the group's trust in these individuals or is it because of your broad-based outlook?
See, we delegate a lot to our employees. That's very true because of necessity. We had many businesses at some time back, and each of them we run them as general manager units, and we delegate fully to general manager. The difference between us and many other business groups in India, we delegate general management. We do not dictate who they buy from, who they sell to, what price they buy, what price they sell. Those are fully left to the general manager. What we do specify, what we do insist on, we have very strict HR and financial norms, and we insist that the people adhere to this. We have our own way of setting the accounts, of determining what the profitability is. We don't allow, for example, one of the common things is receivables write-off. Quite often the business manager comes to you and say, no, I know this firm, it's excellent, even though it's taken 9 months, you get the money, we can't afford to provide. In our rule, we have a provision, 6 months and it's provided. We don't allow any freedom to that. So our tightness is on our financial policies, our HR policies. We determine what people are paid across the group, not the individual business manager. But on the other hand, we give them total freedom to run the business in terms of, as I told you, buying, selling, pricing, and all that. The other thing is that we support our business managers in all their decisions. We have told them, you're free to make decisions. If you make a wrong decision, we will support you. I mean, the first time. Second time, we'll warn you, and the third time, you're out. But you can't expect someone to keep making wrong decisions. But we will not, a decision that is obviously, black and white, any fool can make that decision. It's the decisions that are between, 40 and 60% could go either way, that people have to take value decisions. It could go wrong. So there we support them. As long as they come and say, yes, I took this decision, it's gone wrong, we have no problem with that. We support them. So I think that engenders trust in them and they trust us and we keep up with this. The second is we keep up our word to them in whatever we give our employees. If we give our word to them, we live up to it. Second, I told you we run an ethical organization, so the employees are not required to do anything that keeps them awake at nights. Many of them have mentioned this to us both when they work for us and after they leave. Uh, Probably all this encourages them to have trust in us and want to work for us. They asked this question about ex-employees. We don't actively encourage ex-employees to come and work for us, but we do. We are quite happy to take them back, provided they left in a good in a good manner. I mean, without any problems, because it meant that they are used to our culture. They feel they've looked out the other side of the fence and they feel they want to come back. So they appreciate our way of doing business more. So we'd be happy to have them, which is why we have quite a few ex-employees coming back to us.
This is now a question on sports, cricket in particular. You have been a patron of cricket and you also have a good love for tennis. The Sanma Group has significantly contributed to the development of cricket, but has glaringly not moved into the glitzy commercial aspect of the Indian Premier League or TNPL for that matter. Is there any particular reason for this? And do you feel that leagues like IPL are good for the game as well as the players?
Very two different questions. One is on this and the other one. I'll take the first part. We have been sponsoring cricket for 50 years. In fact, 4 years back, we celebrated our continuous sponsorship of Jolly Rover, the cricket team, first division for 50 years. Now, that's a very unique. We got players who had played for us 50 years back to come onto the stage and meet them. That's not something you see normally where people like PK Belia, anyway, even at the beginning, it was never due to any commercial reasons. We have never had a commercial product, retail product to sell. So we had no reason to advertise commercially. The only thing we had was corporate. For example, this picture you now see is of Neil Harvey inaugurating a ground in the IIT. And that's been running for about almost 25 years now. It's one of the nicest grounds and very good centers of excellence. It's named after my father as the Garrison Center of Cricket Excellence. We do it more because of our love of the game.
To quickly interrupt you, sorry, Mr. Shankar, to quickly interrupt you for the benefit of our audience, we also see Mr. Shankar's father on the extreme right, and we see our SICCI's President Emeritus, Dr. A.C. Muthiah, in between Mr. Shankar and his father.
Yeah.
That's for the audience.
My father was also very interesting. I was going to say that, my father, I'm there, and my brother Kumar is there in the middle. The three of us, and now my son Virat, is the third generation which is interested in cricket and sponsoring it. Just to complete the cycle, the tall gentleman standing there is Bill Jocelyn, who was actually our partner. We had a joint venture in insurance in Australia called Geo Insurance. He was chairman of Geo. He used to be a fast bowler for New South Wales. And he thought of the idea of bringing Neil Harvey here for publicity. The other person is Kumar, my brother. Dr. Muthiah was, of course, the chairman of the Tamil Nadu Cricket Association at that time. So he obviously was there as a friend of ours also. So it's a good function. Excellent function. The pavilion is still there and we're very proud of it. So as I said, our sponsorship, our support came more out of a love of the game. But I must say that in the early days when we didn't have anything to advertise, the only thing you advertise is the name of your company, Chemplast. And we found that if we sponsored First Division Cricket, we got a lot of free press coverage because there was always a cricket match was covered on every Monday morning. It was covered. We used to get some sort of benefit out of it, but it was more corporate coverage.
We now move on to the third section, which is on career path. Mr. Shankar, you've said that you've never used engineering in business, but you also stated that chemical engineering taught you the required tools to run a business. What part did engineering education play in your success? And in spite of the global focus on environment and sustainability goals, this is the second part of the question. There are still many takers who are not going in for traditional fields like chemical engineering or mechanical engineering or civil for that matter. Why do you think this is and how can it be corrected?
Okay, first comment is on chemical engineering per se. I have never designed, well, I did in one of my earliest jobs when I took over of a family company. I actually sat down and designed the heat exchanger, but that's probably the only example in my life. Otherwise, I've never got involved in designing, even though I have a master's in chemical engineering. But what chemical engineering taught me was the ability to think logically. I think it's very, very important. It helps you think logically, step by step, the common sense that I talked about. And for some reason, chemical engineering teaches that. In fact, when I read, what's his name, Jack Welch's autobiography, he also is a chemical engineer. He also is the same thing, that I never had a chance, never used my chemical engineering, but it helped me think logically and step by step. So there must be something to it, and I've always said it helps me think logically. In fact, recently there was a comment by one of the high tech. When I say high tech, I'm talking about the industry, software, that sort of industry. And he also said the same thing. Chemical engineering, which he studied, helped him think logically. That may not have helped him in his job per se. Uh, so much for chemical engineering, but why don't people take the traditional engineering these days? I think initially the switch happened because of the boom in software. So everybody moved to electronics and communication and software. So that's not true anymore. Uh, Today, I think people look at the first engineering degree as just a step up. It's more the next stage that they look at. They do an MBA or an MS in something and move on. But I think the cycle is changing. I think people are coming back to the hard engineering. Without them, uh, the economy cannot progress, industry cannot move forward. You need very strong civil engineers, chemical engineers. But you say they're not interested, but if you look at the numbers, even today the numbers of the hard engineers are much more than they were many years ago. And there is demand for all of that. So I think you will see both going side by side.
Our next question is from a student. This is Miss R. Dharani. She is a first year student at SVC Chennai. Dharani, please go ahead.
So, good evening, sir. I'm honored to be a part of this meet. Do you think you're conservative in your business approach, or you could have done well in sectors like IT and telecom?
About 20 years back, we were in all those sectors. We were in IT, we were in telecom, and we took a decision in the 90s that we are spread too thin, and we need to restrict ourselves to a few areas and excel in them. In fact, my brother is an electronics engineer. He ran our IT, telecom, and many of those businesses. We did a study, and in fact, we were in property development, we were in footwear, a whole variety of industries, which was the style, of course, till the 91-92 reforms. Then the mid 90s, we took this decision. What's the word I should use? Unfortunately, we took a decision to move out of software and telecom, for just example. Just to give you an idea, in telecom, Kumar, my brother, was the one who got the license for the cellular business in Karnataka, Punjab, and Andhra. And then we decided that we were not cut out for it and sold it. And that was bought by Mr. Mitchell. And Airtel's basic areas where they still, Karnataka, Andhra, and Punjab, that's where they made the huge money. And Kumar joined their board. And for many years, Mr. Neil Mitchell used to come and tell me, he asked me to hang on to the shares that he had. I said, forget it, Sunil, like, cancel, we move on. And he used to pull my leg and say that if you had held on to this, 1.2 crores of shares, that'd be worth 12,800 crores or something today. And I used to have to buy that. So we were not, and similarly in software, Kumar had a unit that became, which is the export-related software unit. Again, we got out of it. That became one of the very well companies that did very well. It's a question of choice. We chose something. We think we have done reasonably well in it. No regrets. You can't do everything. We can't do everything and do everything well. No, whether our choices could have been better, it's for somebody else to decide.
Mr. Shankar, what would you say has been the most challenging phase of your career, and how did you get over it?
In a period of 50 years, there are many periods which are challenging. And you can't pick one or two occasions, but if you want me to pick, probably it was close. And, we had situations like when you started Chem class, within 2 months, a critical piece of equipment failed. That means the whole plant, without that, you couldn't run the whole plant was shut down for shut down because it didn't have the equipment. In those days, it was imported a very special heat exchanger. An import of it would have taken another 6 months. 2 months to get the license, then 3 months to place the order, another 3 months delivery. We would have been bankrupt by then. We went running around, and luckily in Trichy, we discovered a friend, Mr. V. Krishnamurthy. He was a deputy general manager in charge of the BHEL plant at that time. And we begged and pleaded, and he agreed to make the heat exchanger for us and made it in 2 months. And the plant just started up again in 2 months. And that was right at the beginning of a career. Another incident is that when we started PVC, within the first 6 months, the price of PVC dropped by 50%, not by 5 or 6, 50%. We are selling below our cost because one of our competitors decided to wipe us out. These are all different challenging situations that run through over the years, and each of them were handled in different ways. But you can think of a more recent one, and a time when everything seems to come together. In 2007, the group was doing very well. We had a lot of resources at the bank. We had an external advisory board of directors. They encouraged us to go out and expand. They said, "You're being very conservative, go out and expand." So we did a few things. We acquired an auto ancillary industry in Europe. It was actually a very high-tech ferrous foundry catered to the automobile industry, and it was actually the oldest foundry in Europe. It was set up in the 15th century and it continued. That was one we acquired. Then we set up our Egypt plant, which at that time was $1 billion, which is far bigger than anything we'd ever done till then. And today, of course, many people for many years told us it was a stupid thing to do. You went and stretched your legs too far. But at that time, it was perfect. Egypt was one of the best places to do business in. The environment for industry was very good. Cost of power was about the. Tell me if I'm overrunning on time because I'm being a little. Arun, am I overrunning on time or?
That's fine. I'm also reducing some of the questions so that we can accommodate within the time. So please go ahead.
Okay, I'll speed up. So in the very well located plant, we went ahead with funding that was ring fenced so that it would not react onto the group. It was business specific. And then in 2008, you know what happened in financial testing. Our whole financing went for a 6. That went bad. And we had made up our mind to avoid Indian financing because it's very difficult to deal with Indian financing issues when you're doing badly. But we came back to India and refinanced in India. We had approval for a pipeline in Egypt to draw raw materials. That approval was withdrawn, which meant that we had a plant which had been set up without a way to get in our raw materials and send it out. So that was a very difficult situation for us for Egypt for a couple of years. Equally, at the same time, we are setting up a plant in India, in Cuddalore. And there again, absolutely coincidentally, we had a plant that we had set up, and the approval for the pipeline to bring in the raw material was not given to us without going into details, for reasons that were not logical, it was more political and stuff. Anyway, that period was one of our toughest. It took us 7 months to come out of it. We had to go to the Supreme Court, various approvals. But then we did come out of it. Our people, God bless them, stood by us. That's what helped us in the long run. And today, both those industries are doing extremely well. So that's why I would say it was one of the more difficult situations we went through 2008.
Business is definitely going to have its up and down. And what's very important for the newer entrepreneurs to understand is that they have to be able to learn from experience and people like yourselves, the long-standing groups like the Sanmar Group, and sustain themselves, because that is what has assisted you come forward. Thank you for sharing those tidbits, Mr. Shankar. Moving on to the fourth section of today's meeting, we now move on to the next generation. We have another student who would like to ask a question of you, Mr. Sai Teja, who is also first year at SVC. Sai, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. I'm really glad that I get to speak with you. So my question is, do you think young entrepreneurs are willing to take risk compared to other older generation kids? So what is your advice to them?
Ultimately, business is risk taking, and whether you're the older generation, newer generation, you have to take risks. The only thing I would say is, the two things I'll tell you. One, I've discovered that when you don't have much to lose, you're you're quite happy with taking risks. You don't have much to lose, and that applied to me also. When I was younger, I was willing to take far bigger risks than now because, after all, I didn't have much to lose. Today, I'm far more circumspect and careful about what I risk. A young entrepreneur doesn't have that holding him back, so he should take risks. But in taking risks, you can't go berserk. You should evaluate the resources that you have, not just money, people, time, and cut the cloth to suit cut the suit to suit your cloth. Because whatever you must take the risk in line with the resources you have, so you don't end up stretching your legs beyond what you can afford. That's the sort of advice I would give you.
Mr. Shankar, today startups is a buzzword, whether you look at Tamil Nadu per se or India at large. Also, we are saying that we are the country with the third highest number of unicorns. So startups definitely is a huge buzzword here. Now, we have seen startups certainly happening in services. Bulk of them are in services. But the extent to which they are happening in agriculture, whether it might be organic farming or even manufacturing, is quite small. What do you think needs to be done to get more startups going across the three rather than being only focused on services?
See, I think the differentiating factor, most of the unicorns are in, as you clearly put in services, where the capital outlays are smaller. And in fact, today, these unicorns seem to be able to raise much more from the markets than they put out in capital. I mean, that's more power to them, and more. I am very jealous of them, but that's what can happen. Whereas manufacturing requires much higher capital outlays. I'm not very familiar with agriculture, so we're not coming, but manufacturing certainly requires much higher capital outlays. And today's policy environment, I would say, is not very conducive. To give you a quick example, if you want to start a new industry, like in the old days, you want to start a business for, let's say, tires, or cement, or plastics. You would go to the development institutions and ask them for a loan. They would give it to you. You would start working and setting it up. If you had a problem, you go back to them and get the loan restructured. They would work with you and stuff like that. Today, there are no development institutes. There are only banks. And banks have very, very tight norms which they apply in determining whether you're a good risk or not. So they say that you have to start production within 3.5 years. And unless you say yes, you have no chance of getting money. So you say yes. On the other hand, the norms for getting your approval to start production, primarily say environment, are so strict that probably at the end of 3.5 years, you haven't even got the first approval for environment. You haven't even dug ground where you're supposed to start production. So the bank immediately labels you an NPA. And that's the end of that's pretty much the end of it, because everything gets worse. Once you're an NPA, getting more money, which you require honestly to start your business, doesn't work. So I think there has to be more integration between the different policy environments, whether it is approval process or it is the financing process. All these need to be integrated far better. I would say they're operating in different silos. I think that's a problem today.
Continuing on entrepreneurship, you've classified entrepreneurs into two categories. The first is those who come up with ideas that are very new and have never heard of before. And out of these, only perhaps 1 in a million succeed. There is the second type of entrepreneurs, those who work on existing ideas, but with dedication and hard work, and they succeed in a big way. What would you say is the entrepreneurship category that you come under, and what would you recommend for the next generation?
Okay, I have to amend that. That I said a couple of years ago. Today, this third category, one category, of course, which is what most of us, I belong to anyway, is where you pick an existing industry, you set it up and learn to work at it. And the chance of success are reasonably high, but the returns are not as high as. Yeah. The other is where you come up with a new idea, and if you're the 1 in a million that succeeds, you make huge returns. But the difference I'm trying to tell you is today it's far more than one. I think several people succeed in new ideas. I mean, if somebody had told you 5 years back that you could make millions by delivering food to your house or whatever it is, without getting names, I would have said you're crazy. I mean, why would anybody pay for that? But today it's not one, but many industries that are making money, not just making money, raising money on such these are extant today. Now, whether they will continue for the future is to be seen. After all, the late 90s, people said the same thing about the dot-com revolution, and it changed. So perhaps these new, what did you call them now? These billionaires,
Unicorns.
unicorns, where they will be, God knows. But we'll have to wait and see. Because they run basically dependent on the stock market. And once, and you know, the stock market is a very fickle mistress, so we have to wait and see how that goes. But I belong to both. For example, in most of our industries, the traditional industries, and we worked hard, we didn't get huge returns. But if you pick my engineering business, that was something unusual. We went and identified a product, set it up, and while it's nothing like a unicorn and it's still a privately owned business, it's done very well for the last 40, 45 years. So I think I've done both types of business.
For the benefit of our audience, India is supposed to have 72 unicorns as per the latest number.
Sorry?
72 unicorns.
Oh, okay.
And India is supposed to have 5 decacorns. That's another terminology. So a unicorn is a company with more than $1 billion in market cap, while a decacorn is a company with more than $10 billion in market cap. So India is supposed to have 5 decacorns for the reference of our audience. Mr. Shankar, we now move on to the last section of today's conversation, your inputs for society. In one of your interviews, you appealed to society where you said, quote, "Don't look at businessmen as crooks," unquote. What prompted you to say this?
Actually, what I said was, don't look at all businessmen as crooks. You see, there is a general feeling, which unfortunately at that time at least was encouraged by the powers that be, that businessmen industries are crooks. You know, this period was about 8-10 years ago, and you know the period I'm referring to. Because of a few bad apples, everybody was labeled with the same thing. My stand is that businessmen are human beings. You have good businessmen, you have bad businessmen. There's no point in labeling all businessmen as bad or crooks or whatever. Nobody also starts off by being a crook. It's situation, complexities that lead one to it. And the more important thing is that at that time, business failures are equated with the person behind it being a crook. If your business failed, it will automatically assume that it is because you had diverted money, you had taken it away, you had done this, done that. Nobody was willing to accept the fact that the business will go bad, which is most of the time the reason that the business went bad. So that was my point in that speech, that first look at the reasons the business went bad before you start applying standard terminology to business.
If you take a country like the US, for instance, you've got,
Sorry?
if you take a country like the US, for instance, there have been several companies that have gone bust because of various problems that the promoters have faced. But the banks in that country, for instance, doesn't treat every other businessman in that same manner. But in India, unfortunately, that is the case, where you have a few bad apples and that automatically translates to the rest of the business community, where we don't have that kind of balanced outlook at looking at business and supporting good businesses as well. Going to the next point, Mr. Shankar, Sanmar has been involved in ensuring better quality of life for the community around it. Where do you think we are as a nation in propelling this important activity?
You see, I would say in the last couple of years, there has been quite a lot of forward movement in this. One of the most critical issues, I would say, is this mandatory CSR spending. Now, while I and many others disagree with the way it is mandated, but the fact that you have to spend 2% of your average profits on CSR activities means that a lot of it is going into good end use, good end uses, whether it is health or rural development or community development. I think it's a very broad positive step, and I think in a few years you will see the results of all this adding up. So far it has always got. I still believe it's still government's job to do this primarily. But your question was, has there been a forward movement in industry? I said yes, because to me, industry job is to serve its constituents, its shareholders, and it's for them to decide what they do with their money. But if you have to go down a particular path, I think what has been now chosen is very good. Hopefully, the rough edges will get smoothed out in the next few years, and we will see both government and private industry working together to improve the lot of the common man.
Our next question is from the audience again. We have Mr. S.M. Shankar, who's chair of SICCI's Food and Nutrition Committee. Mr. Shankar, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. It was a very interesting talk to hear from you, sir. And this question is about chemical industry. Generally believed chemical industry hurt our environment more than other industries. Do you see merit?
Yes, in fact, earlier in the talk, I said yes, chemical industries are by their very nature capable of hurting the environment because they do have effluents. And unless properly treated, they could hurt the environment more than any other industry. I mean, engineering industry sets out some filings and some cooling fluid and stuff, whereas chemical industry has lots of quantities of treated effluent coming out. So yes, it has by its nature capable of hurting the environment. But as we have shown, by proper treatment and treatment of the effluents and using it, you can ensure it doesn't hurt. And I think we have shown the zero liquid discharge is a clear step forward. And I think today it's moved well forward in that direction.
Mr. Shankar,
Thank
you
you, sir.
established the SR Seshadri Training Institute. What interested you to do this?
See, this was at a time when we were finding it difficult to get proper trained people, and we decided to set up a training institute for people from the different institutes who did not have the appropriate industrial training, and we decided to set up a training institute where training that was more aligned towards what they would do in industry. At that time, unfortunately, Seshadri passed away about 15 years back, passed away a little early. He was a brilliant engineer, and he worked with me for for I would say 40 years, and he set up the entire engineering industry. And he was one of a kind. He was unique. In fact, he used to work in SPIC in the early days, and I was lucky to get him from there. He had, for example, one of his mottos was that I can't go to sleep every day unless I learn one new thing. Doesn't matter what it is, I have to learn one new thing. I thought it was a very unique way to say things. He was brilliant, and he passed away. So at that time, we thought, and he believed very, very, very strongly in training and institution, and so we thought we would name it after him.
We now come to the last question for today, Mr. Shankar. This is one of my favorites. You've been significantly contributing to various social causes. The Child's Trust Hospital is one such. What has been your motivation to contribute to such causes?
No, contributing to such causes is a general, I mean, if it's good for, we've generally been spending a reasonable amount of our money on charitable causes. So that's, if you ask about Child's Trust per se, 30 years ago when it was first set up, I was one of the original, I was the first treasurer in fact. And then of course I got very busy and I withdrew from that. And then about 10 years back, it was in a lot of difficulty, and they asked me to come back into it and help out. And I offered to help, and I said, what I can do is collect a group of people to manage the institution. I can contribute in terms of money, but in terms of management, in terms of time, I don't think at the time, but I can get some people in here. And, you know, we got together a very good group of people headed by Dr. A.C. Motia, who's done an extremely good job as chairman of it for the last 10 years. We've really renovated the hospital. Mr. Lakshmi Narayan of Cognizant, Malika Srinivas of Cognizant. A lot of us got together. Many of us contributed money, but we helped to build up the institution. And you say, why do you do it? I mean, it's a pediatric hospital, and if you go there and see the children, piped in tubes running out of their hands and legs, it really twists your heart, and you want to do something for it. So I think I would encourage all of you to come visit there and hopefully open up your cash purses, contribute. It's a very good cause.
Mr. Shankar, that brings us to the end of the discussion section of our evening today. We now have a surprise for you, which is a quick fire round. I never told you about this because I wanted it to be a surprise. And as I said during the beginning of my speech, you can be rest assured that we want you to be at comfort so that we can invite you back. So during this quick fire round, which we started about a few sessions ago, I will be sharing 5 words with you, and we would like to hear from you as to what goes on in your mind when you hear each one of these words.
Oops. Okay.
With your permission, Mr. Shankar.
Certainly.
So the first one is Sanmar.
Sorry?
Sanmar.
Okay. How much time do you have for each?
Please go ahead, Mr. Shankar.
Okay. Sanmar is actually a funny, it's a combination of my name and my brother's name, Shankar and Kumar. It was not supposed to be that. When we started the group in the early 70s, my secretary asked me for some 3 names. You were supposed to be 3 names, and the first one was some highfalutin name like Transoceanic or Interglobal or something. And we came up with 2. The third one I couldn't come up with. I put some name, put Shankar Kumar, put something, whatever you want. Unfortunately, the other one the registrar companies chose, and that got stuck with that. And I never really wanted my name to be in a group's name, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. Second, we would like the word Sanmar to stand, as I've been saying earlier today, to stand for good business practices, good ethics, and good treatment of people. I hope we have succeeded in that. That's what I would say.
The second word is ethics.
Ethics, yes, again, I've spoken a lot of it today. Yes, I think it means a lot to me. Not that I consider myself better than others or anything, but I found that if I treat, I said this earlier, if I treat for example, start with my employees, if I treat my employees ethically, then they treat the organization as ethically. We do have very few, well, we have our own, obviously, like any other business, we have cases of employees acting unethically, making money and stuff like that. But it's a lot less than you could otherwise expect. They say their point of view is that the organization can afford not to act like this, and we should also be able to act ethically. I think that's helped us.
The third word is cricket.
Cricket. It's been a lifelong passion for me, and continues to be a passion. You asked me a question earlier, which I didn't answer, about IPL and stuff. One thing I can say, cricket in the last 10 years, the game has changed so dramatically, it's funny. It's not the same game anymore. You have 2 different games being played in the same set of equipment and stuff. The traditional test cricket, long form cricket, and the short form cricket are 2 entirely different. The audiences are very different. In fact, it's like if any of you play billiards and snooker, they're 2 entirely different games. Billiards is a game and snooker is a game, but they're played with the same instruments. But they're not compared. Whereas today in cricket, you compare test cricket and say, oh, this guy's not very good in IPL and stuff. They're not expected to be, because they're 2 different games, and I think that's how this game will evolve. And as far as we're concerned, we'll be very happy sponsoring cricket for 50 years. We don't know how it will go in future.
The fourth word is youth.
What?
Youth.
I can't hear it. Youth?
Yes.
The word. Straight away I can say how I wish for it, but I think that would be true of most people of my age, Milu. I think it's a time when you're young, you don't appreciate what it is to be young, unfortunately. You have to grow old to appreciate youth, which is sad.
That's my favorite answer so far, Mr. Shankar.
Sorry?
That's my favorite answer so far.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
What you just said is my favorite answer so far.
Okay, thank you.
The last word is life.
Light?
Life.
Lighte or L-I-T-E?
L-I-F-E. F as in fish.
Oh, life. Okay. Boy, you're getting a little philosophical. Life is there in different phases. I think you have to take each phase that comes along and not bemoan what it brings. This morning I read somewhere a 60-year-old man getting up and saying, I feel like I'm 30 again. I wake up without aches and pains. And I was looking desperately for his telephone number or email to find out how he does that, to call him and say, how do you get rid of your aches and pains in the morning? Because I think life is something, is a bundle of experiences. You build them along, and then you look back and say, I wish I had done that different, this different. But you shouldn't regret it. I think all that is part of the learning experience. And you really can't take anything with you when you go. So live it up and enjoy it.
Thank you very much for that impromptu session, Mr. Shankar. I appreciated it. But before we close, there is one question that came up on our online chat. This is from Mr. Rajan Peter. And with your permission, I'd like to ask this question. Mr. Rajan Peter says, quote, since you make aluminum, are there plans to go for small and affordable housing using aluminum, unquote?
We don't make aluminum, so I'm able to record it very easily. But yes, there is certainly a need for cheap, affordable housing. Perhaps aluminum is not the way because it's very power intensive. You have to look in future for, look at the green environment, and you have to look at stuff that is less power intensive. Aluminum is one of the most power intensive. And I'm talking as an outsider.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shankar. Greatly appreciated your being with us and patiently answering each one of our points.
Can I say one thing if I have a minute?
Please go ahead.
No, I'd like to, this is not a standard comment. I'd like to congratulate SICCI on this whole concept of SICCI 360. The way you've set it up, the structure, the format, I must congratulate you. I think it's a very interesting way both for the person on the hot seat and for you. And I think I congratulate you and keep it going. In fact, I'm going to go and listen to all the earlier sessions and your future sessions. Congratulations.
Thank you very, very much for your kind words, Mr. Shankar. Greatly appreciated it. This is a teamwork, and I will be sharing few comments about the team at the end of this session. So look forward to your seeing that as well. And certainly, each one of our sessions are hosted on our website. The audience can kindly go there and take a look at that. If any of you have any issues in connecting, please let us know, and we'd be glad to assist you. Mr. Shankar, as part of the SICCI 360 format, we have a request. We will be sending you your photograph, and we would like you to kindly autograph it and also affix today's date and send it to us. We will send this to you at the first available opportunity, and if we can request you to do the honors.
Sure.
Also, Mr. Shankar, as part of the SICCI 360 format and appreciating your presence with us today, we would like to give you a memento. This is going to be a certificate. This is a certificate from the Kanchi Kamakoti Child's Trust Hospital. You did mention a lot about it. As new as SICCI 360 is as a concept, the SICCI 360 team has come out with a novel way of honoring each one of our guests. For those of you who are not aware, the Child's Trust Hospital, which is based in Nungambakam, has been providing EOMAN service to children from underprivileged families, taking care of the medical expenses at a very, very small amount of money, so that these people, they are not able to get attention elsewhere. They're able to come here and get the necessary medical facilities. Mr. Shankar, we have contributed in your name, and this certificate will be sent to you also at the earliest. You should receive it shortly from us. Thank you very, very much.
It was an excellent initiative. Thank you very much.
SICCI would like to take this opportunity to thank for today's session my good friend, Mr. Vijay Shankar, who's Deputy Chairman of the Sanmar Group, as well as Executive Committee member of SICCI. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the SICCI 360 team for the wonderful job that they have done. Without them, we would not have been able to conduct 16 continuous non-stop sessions ever since we started in October 2020. This team is chaired by Mrs. Valli Arun, who's president of the Velingro Group and trustee of the Tamil Isai Sangam. Professor T. Murugavel, head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at SVCE, is the co-chair of this committee, and he does the job of researching each one of our guests and putting together a very good set of points that we can then discuss with our guests. Mr. Gokul Santanam, who's Senior Vice President at Emphasis, is responsible for the marketing-related efforts of SICCI 360. Mr. Amalan Alavandar, Environment Consultant at the Asian Development Bank, is responsible for moderating the online chat session and feeding it to us for attention. Ms. Vilasini M. Arun, a student of clinical psychology, brings in the student perspective into SICCI 360. And of course, the SICCI Secretariat, represented by Ms. Bhavani Srinivasan, who's Assistant Secretary of SICCI, has been doing a wonderful job in conducting this session for the last year and a half or so. I would like to also take this opportunity to share with you that the next session of SICCI 360, session 17, has already been scheduled. This is with Mr. S.P. Muthuraman, one of our most noted and successful film directors. He has directed more than 72 films, out of which 25 of which have been with Rajinikanth alone. Again, each one of these sessions have been extremely successful. Each one of his movies have been extremely successful. And this is also the first time that we are going to get a gentleman or a person from the film industry to join us. This is scheduled for Thursday, February 10th at 4:30 p.m. Again, this is going to be online over our WebEx communication. We will send it to you. We will send the link to you at the earliest as well. Please mark your calendars and do join us for this. This brings us to an end of today's session. Again, thank you very, very much to each one of you for joining us today. And we certainly look forward to your ongoing participation with us. I would like to take this opportunity to wish each one of you safe times to you as well as your family. Thank you. Nandri. Vanakkam.
Thank you.